All right, hello again, Algebra 2 people. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to solve quadratics with the quadratic formula. Um, the quadratic formula is something that I call a sledgehammer. It'll always work, but please, for the love of all that is good and holy, don't forget how to factor. In fact, whenever you see a quadratic and it says solve a quadratic, that's all it says, try to factor it first, because for heaven's sakes, that's going to be faster. But there are quadratics out there that cannot be factored. And so for that, we can use the quadratic formula. Okay, so the way we start, so obviously we need it in standard form, and we know what that is by now. So that's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Just like before, it does have to be equal to 0. If you got stuff on the other side, get everything on one side, and then we can apply that. And here is the formula. Now, there's all kinds of different ways to remember that formula. If you go to YouTube and you type in quadratic formula memorizing or something like that, you'll find about a million different videos, and every teacher has their own favorite one. But find something that works for you. Find a way to remember that, because it's something you should definitely know. Also, I do encourage you also to look at a derivation of where this formula comes from. I usually do this in class. I'm not going to do this in the video just because it does take some time. But basically, if you know how to complete the square, you can complete the square with standard form, solve it for x, and you end up getting this formula. Okay? But we're going to kind of move on and just kind of apply the formula in a couple different ways. Now, I personally think it's useful to do one, even though like in this first example, you might be looking at this going, well, hold on a second here. I can just factor that and don't have to worry about using that big old formula. And you're right, but I want to show you, just for the sake of plugging in numbers and how it works, that this is why I call it a sledgehammer, because this is going to work and get the same answers. Now, we know how to factor this. This would just be x plus 2 and x plus 3. So my solution would just be -2 and -3, right? So we've known how to factor and solve that for a while. But what if you're just kind of having a moment and couldn't figure out how to factor something, and you're like, man, I'm just going to use a quadratic formula, whatever. So we can do that. So we're going to plug in our A and our B and our C. So in this case, my A is 1, my B is 5, and my C is 6. Now, when you go plugging in numbers, make sure you're using parentheses throughout the formula. Okay, just follow what it says. So negative parentheses 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 6 all over 2 times 1. That's what I call the plug part. Now we've got the chug part, plug and chug. So just clean everything up. So that's -5 plus minus the square root of 25, 5 squared, -4 times 1 times 6, minus 24, all over 2. And now I can kind of clean this up. 25 minus 24 is 1. Okay? But I can go one step further here, because for heaven's sakes, the square root of 1 is 1. So I can go one more step here and just say that says -5 plus or minus 1 over 2. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, hold on, what's up with this plus minus thing? Well, remember, back in quadratic land, we've known for a while that a lot of quadratics, not all of them, but a lot of quadratics, we know it's a parabola, and we know a lot of times the parabola is going to hit the x-axis in 2 places. So that's why we have this plus minus, because it really is covering both of those solutions kind of at the same time, kind of at once, if that makes sense. So since I got a clean number here, I can actually break this into its 2 individual solutions. So I can say that's -5 plus 1 over 2, which is negative 4 over 2, which is our negative 2, or negative 5 minus 1 over 2, which is our negative 3. We got that about 2 minutes ago by factoring, but again, I wanted to show you just by plugging in the numbers and simplifying as much as we can, we'll get the same answers. Okay, so I've got one more, and again, this one can also be factored, but wait, remember, it has to be equal to 0. So the first thing I got to do is subtract 4 from both sides and write it as 2x squared minus 7x minus 4 equals 0. And then I have my a, b, and c values. Oops. Okay. By the way, if you need to pause the video here too, just to write down the quadratic formula, you can pause the video here and write that down in your paper so you have it for future reference. So take a moment and go ahead and again, this one can be factored, but I want you to go and pause the video and go through and see if you can simplify it completely using the quadratic formula just for practice on plugging the numbers in. Okay, so hopefully you have that. So here we go. So it's negative 7 plus minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 4 all over 2 times 2. When we clean that up, 2 negatives make a positive. Negative 7 squared is positive 49. Negative 4 times 2 times negative 4 is 32 over 4. Add up the inside. So we have 7 plus or minus root 81 over 4. But again, in this case, 81, square root of that, I know that's 9. So I can keep on going. Break that up into 2 solutions. So 7 plus 9 over 4, which is just 4. And then 7 minus 9 over 4, which is negative 1/2. And again, if you factored that, you would get the same answers faster, honestly. But you can do either one you want. Now, clearly, again, if you can factor it because it's way faster. But let's take a look at a quadratic that cannot be factored, where we kind of locked in to using the quadratic formula. So here's another example here. So obviously not factorable, nothing. 1 times 3 is the only way you can get to 3, and that does not equal 5. So we got to do our quadratic formula. So plug it in. Negative 5 plus minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3 all over 2 times 1. That's going to be negative 5 here, plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 12, negative 4 times 1 times negative 3, all over 2. Clean up the inside. Now I got good news for you here, because as soon as this radical does not come out to a clean, like it's not a clean perfect square, you can stop. Now, sometimes this radical may be able to be simplified, and depending on your teacher, they may want you to simplify that radical. I am personally not overly concerned with that. Hopefully I don't get in trouble from other math teachers by saying that, but this one can't be simplified anyway, so we're stuck. So that is your final answers. And remember, that's 2 answers at once. It's negative 5 plus root 37 over 2 and negative 5 minus root 37 over 2. Okay. So I've got 2 more examples here on the paper. So if you want to pause the video one more time and do both of those examples, remember on example 4, we do have to get the 9x over to the other side first before we do our A, B, and C. And then number 5 is set up for you, ready to go. So if you want to pause the video, get those answers, and I'm just going to go through real quickly and show you those solutions and wrap everything up. Okay, so for example 4, remember we do have to move that 9x over first and make sure I write it in order. So 3x squared minus 9x plus 4 equals 0. So my A is 3, my B is negative 9, my C is 4. So when I do that, x equals negative 9 plus minus. And when you clean that up, your final answer is going to be x equals positive 9, positive 9, plus or minus the square root of 33 all over 6. And then for the last example, my A is negative 2, my B is 1, my C is 8. And when you clean all that up, you should have x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 65 all over negative 4. Now you will notice on these examples, all of my inside numbers and the radicals and the square roots were all positive. I did that on purpose. In another video here very soon, we'll talk about what happens when that radical is negative. But we got to do some groundwork on that before we get to those. So that is all for this video. Again, quadratic formula, make sure you know it. All kinds of resources on YouTube for different like jingles and songs and different ways you can remember that. Find a way that works for you. Know the formula. Know how to plug it in. Watch your signs. If you have some questions, feel free to email your teacher. Let me know. Until next time, stay safe.